Hi team, we run Coach Alexa here, coach for Reading, South Oxfordshire and online. Caffeine. Caffeine is a performance enhancing drug. It used to be, a good while ago, on the banned list for elite level athletes in competition until they realised that it was slightly unfair given how ubiquitous it is in cultures all around the world. Caffeine enhances your performance effectively by reducing the perception of effort. So you feel like you're putting less effort in for the same amount of performance. So it effectively makes things just feel a touch easier. From our brain's perspective, it also ups our heart rate a little bit, which can have its pros and cons, but it's worth bearing in mind if you train with a heart rate monitor. A sudden sort of intake of high caffeine will up your heart rate. It can also have a little bit of an impact because of that kind of impact on our, kind of energy levels and metabolism, etc. And heart rate. It can give us the jitters a little bit if we have too much or we're not used to it. It can impact our digestion, our stomachs, and our bowels a little bit too. Each individual person is impacted in different ways. And one of the biggest factors in terms of how caffeine will impact you is how much of it you drink day to day. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I have 1 cup of green tea, which is about on average, half the amount of caffeine of a standard cup of tea, which is on average half the amount of caffeine of a standard cup of coffee, once a day with my breakfast, and that's it. I don't drink any other caffeinated products. Chocolate, incidentally, contains caffeine. It's not just hot drinks and Coca-Cola. So for me, if I have a cup of coffee, that is a real shot in the arm. I feel like I should be running somewhere really quickly to kind of burn off all this excess energy. My heart rate is quite high. If I'm finishing off an event, it can be a great little lift to get me over the finish line. If I'm just going to be sat on the sofa, it really does feel like I don't need all this kind of chemicals flowing around my body. The other example I would give is a runner of mine that I worked with a few years ago, and we've been working together for a little bit. We've been building up our long runs, and we suddenly got to the point around sort of 10-11 mile long run on a part of her marathon training program where she was starting to get really bad headaches, like borderline migraine style headaches, about an hour and a half into her long runs. And after a little bit of toing and froing, sort of hydration, about maybe even posture and neck pain or fueling. We talked about caffeine, and she told me that she drank upwards of 12 cups of coffee a day on average, and most of those would usually be in the morning. So she would be heading out for her long run, maybe having had a couple of cups of coffee. And then once she got to the 90-minute, 2-hour mark, the body would be very much normally we'd be on a cup of coffee 6 by now. What's happening? And effectively she was getting caffeine withdrawal, which was causing real headaches. So how much caffeine is useful in sports drinks and gels for you massively depends on what your current average caffeine intake is. For somebody like me who drinks very little, I use it very much as the emergency red button if I'm flagging in a longer race, if I'm doing something perhaps that's overnight to try and overcome that natural desire to want to sleep. If I'm flagging energy level wise in the last sort of 3 or 4 miles of a marathon, as I say, that shot in the arm to get me going. For people like this runner that I talked about, we had to come up with a caffeine strategy to even just maintain the current caffeine intake that her body was expecting. So for her, that caffeine intake was not so much about enhancing performance, it was making sure that caffeine withdrawal she'd started getting wasn't going to be detrimental to her performance. So we were just bringing her back up to her normal baseline. And then, we talked about, did we want to go over to potentially get a performance benefit? But that would have been a lot of sports caffeine products. And so we decided against it in the end. We went for just maintaining. But you can use it as a strategy, in the middle and towards the end of a marathon. As I say, it does have a performance enhancing effect. It will reduce that perception of effort somewhat. But definitely try these things out before you turn up at a race, because, as I say, particularly if you're quite caffeine sensitive like me, whilst I use them as a bit of a backup, you know, as I say, emergency red button option, for some of us the downsides outweigh the benefits. Happy running.